So.
Alison, please give me a sign when I should begin. Good day and welcome. My name is Roberta Clark, and I am a commissioner with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And today, I am the moderator for this commemoration of the International Women Human Rights Defenders Day. This event is being hosted by the Action Coalition for Feminist Movements and Leadership in collaboration with UN Women and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. The Action Coalition on Feminist Movements and Leadership is one of 6 action coalitions which were formed at the Generation Equality Forum held in Paris in 2021 as part of a 5-year action journey to achieve progress towards gender equality. This action coalition, made up of feminist organizations, member states, and a private sector organization, is committed to promoting, expanding, strengthening, and protecting civic space and supporting the efforts of feminist activists in all of their diversity. They wish to advance women's human rights defenders by enabling safe environments to counter gender-based discrimination, stigma, and hate speech. Today, in the framework of the 16 Days of Activism to end all forms of violence against women, we celebrate and thank women who defend human rights and all people who defend the rights of women, girls, and LGBTIQ people. It is also a day to hold states accountable for protecting the rights of women human rights defenders, to promote and protect those rights. We are here today to recommit to the promotion and the protection of women human rights defenders against gender-based violence, to ensure their access to justice, to ensure the provision of resources for women's organizations, and to support women defenders' participation in public and political life. And so as we start this 90-minute session, I wish to thank all of the participants of this event, and of course, all of those of you who are attending from all over the world at this, which is the very first such collaboration to commemorate this important date in the Human Rights Annual Calendar. Before we begin, I would like to ask Alison Humphreys of UN Women to give some housekeeping rules.
Thank you, Roberta. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. We are committed to creating enabling events at which all may participate in an inclusive, respectful, and safe environment. This is a safe space for sharing knowledge, experience, skills, and opinions in a mutually respectful manner. Any form of bullying, harassment, abusive use of language, aggressive expressions of opinions, misrepresentation, or any such undesirable behavior will not be tolerated. Participants who engage in such actions will be immediately removed from the session without prior notice. Live interpretation of the event is available in English, Spanish, and French by clicking interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Please select your preferred language at the beginning of the program. Live captioning is also available, and you can click the closed captioning button at the bottom of your Zoom window as well. As you would note, sign language is also available for this event. We kindly request that participants share their questions using only the virtual Q&A feature that's also at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will select a handful of relevant questions for panelists to answer during the interactive elements of the event. We will try to respond to as many questions as possible, but we apologize as we may not get to all due to time constraints. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. I now want to invite Suba WHRDs of Korea and also the co-chair of the Action Coalition to make her welcome remarks.
Thanks so much, Roberta, and thanks, Alison. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm Suba. I'm the co-chair of the Action Coalition on Feminist Movements and Leadership, as Roberta has noted. I work with CREA. CREA is a global feminist human rights organization led by feminists in the Global South. And we are, as ever, privileged to be in this Action Coalition, working alongside many allies. Our Action Coalition has since the beginning shared a commitment to the protection of women's human rights defenders in all their diversity and to their ability to be able to safely carry out their important work. In our work collectively and in this session, we have always taken the term WHRDs to refer to women's human rights defenders, which we believe includes rights defenders of all ages, races, castes, classes, regions, abilities, sexual orientations, and genders who engage in the promotion and protection of our human rights and fundamental freedoms, and all people who engage in the advancement of gender justice and equality, either individually or in association with each other. This group includes women and other feminist, trans, intersex, and non-binary rights defenders. WHRDs are at the forefront of our most important struggles today, fighting for climate justice, bodily autonomy, economic justice, and against the unjust and violent occupation of territories, against militarization and authoritarianism. They are protecting our rights, our democracies, and our planet. Feminist movements led by WHRDs need our support. They need resources, and importantly, we need states to be accountable to their duties to WHRDs and their movements. We need states to abolish, repeal, or at least begin to reform laws and policies which are used to discriminate against WHRDs, exclude them, arrest and detain them, and incarcerate them for long periods of time with no redress mechanisms available to them. We need states to hold accountable those who attack and kill WHRDs, even perhaps especially when the violence is state-supported. Our Blueprints Action Area 2 is dedicated to creating safe environments for feminist activists and WHRDs because we understand that a world in which every person can safely and freely demand their rights, hold their governments accountable, and hold the international community accountable is a just, equitable, and democratic world where every person's rights can be affirmed. This is why a number of feminist organizations, networks, and funds, including members of this AC, came together to develop the indispensable measures to ensure the holistic protection and leadership of WHRDs, which we launched at the Generation Equality Forum in Mexico last year. You will hear more about this from our amazing speakers today, to whom I wish to extend our collective gratitude for being here with us and for their fearless work. Thank you to you all who have made the time to be here with us to commemorate this important day, and to everyone who has played a part in putting this event together and making it possible. I look forward to an exciting discussion. Thanks, Roberta, over to you.
Thank you, Suba. I'm really very happy to welcome Ms. Åsa Regner, who is the Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, to also give us some welcome remarks.
Thank you so much, Roberta. Lovely to see you, Alison, Suba on the screen. And I also want to thank the High Commissioner for Human Rights, my very good friend Volker, as well as the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, Ms. Mary Lawlor, and also the missions of Norway and Colombia, and leaders of the Action Coalition on Feminist Movements and Leadership for your very important contributions to today's event and in general going forward. Most of all, I want to thank the women human rights defenders who are here with us today for your feminist leadership and your fearless work and advocacy in support of human rights, gender equality, climate action, etc. Often you are also those who in practical action defend and protect women. You're not only doing advocacy and policy work, and I'm so happy that you prioritized this event here today. I look forward to listening to you. Women human rights defenders protect our freedoms and hold states accountable, as Suba said, for complying with their obligations, international agreements that they signed, etc., to provide the widest enjoyment of human rights without discrimination. They all operate at the heart of feminist movements and work to secure a healthy, peaceful, and sustainable environment for all. And only last night, I participated in a discussion at the Columbia University, which was exactly about women's rights defenders and their work for democracy, more of a deep dive in that. And it was actually extremely interesting. And we all know a vital issue to understand and unpack. But because in many contexts, women human rights defenders, including indigenous, LGBTIQ plus defenders, migrant activists, environmental and land defenders, face often hostile attacks, reprisals, and other severe, often gender-based violations of their rights, and experience coordinated suppression of their freedoms of speech and association, both online and offline. And even those who brief the Security Council, we know that a part of them are facing reprisals once they leave the Security Council and perhaps return to their home countries. Alongside the targeting of women human rights defenders, hard-won gender equality gains are also being eroded. Democratic institutions are facing existential threats, and civic space remains closed or under conditions of severe repression, all threatening the women and human rights defenders' ability to do their important work for all of us. We also know that the constant underfunding is part of the daily difficulties that these feminist leaders and organizations face. Also, women's rights defenders have repeatedly told us that consistent political support is one of the most important things that we, as the international community, can do to support them. We have to use every opportunity to do so. We also must accelerate our efforts to protect women's rights defenders and human rights defenders, and we should not compromise their participation or visibility. In all their diversity, they have a right to participate, and we have an obligation to create a safe environment that enables them to do so. In most countries, also, these groups are actually those who do push the gender equality agenda with support if in good conditions from politicians, but they are often the ones who actually go before with proposals and push politics before them. I commend the leaders of the Action Coalition on Feminist Movement and Leadership who have committed to prioritizing support for women's human rights defenders and the promotion of civic space as key pillars of their multi-stakeholder commitments as part of generation equality. And I think we've also seen in the case of Norway how they have consistently pushed these issues in their role as a member of the Security Council, which now comes to its end in a month. I'm also pleased to see that this year's focus on the Secretary General's Unite campaign right now to end violence against women and girls is activism and the critical role of women's rights defenders. At UN Women, we remain fully committed to supporting you. And I'm really happy to share with you that only yesterday, UN Women, in partnership with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders and the Special Rapporteur on the human rights of migrants, launched a set of recommendations on women human rights defenders at risk in migration context, which will fill an urgent gap for migrant women's rights defenders who are often marginalized, unrecognized, and underfunded. And just the other day, I was in Juba in South Sudan and met with a group of them, and that certainly makes an impression. Our response to the heightened risk, in response to the heightened risk for women's rights defenders who work in conflict-affected countries, the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund established a dedicated funding window to support the protection and safe participation of women's rights defenders in conflict and crisis-affected countries. And as you know, this last year, and ongoing, unfortunately, we see a lot of the war in Ukraine, of course, but also very complicated situations like the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, the situation in Ethiopia, etc. And this fund has, I understand, been welcomed by women's organizations in these contexts. So, lastly, in the context that I said, with many compounding global crises, as well as the continuation of pushback against human rights and gender equality, UN Women is updating our own internal guidance on women's human rights defenders in consultation with civil society and the defenders themselves to better provide tailored support right now, with an emphasis on acknowledging and responding to intersecting identities and linking this work with our existing civic space initiatives in partnership with the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So I want to thank all of you for being here today. This is extremely important, very urgent, and I am very much looking forward to hearing your advice, your guidance, requests, analysis, and demand, so that we can all work even more intensely together going forward. Thank you so much. Over to you, Roberta.
Thank you very much, Åsa. And we will get back to some of the messages that you gave, I think, in the plenary discussion. I also now want to ask the organizers to play the video message, which comes from Mr. Volker Turk, who is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and we very much appreciate his contribution. He was not able to be here with us in real time, but he has sent a video message. And thanks to the High Commissioner and colleagues who are on the call with us.
Courageous women human rights defenders have helped shape a freer and more equal world. They have challenged the centuries-old patriarchy, the discrimination and inequality that have long shrouded the lives of women and girls. And beyond this, throughout history, women human rights defenders have been at the forefront of social justice movements. They have all inspired us in our own formative years, from those marching against apartheid in South Africa to the young indigenous girls engaged in the protection of natural resources. We are witnessing the courageous women and girls in Afghanistan and in the Islamic Republic of Iran, for example, who are demanding an end to systematic discrimination against them, as well as to socio-economic and legal reforms to ensure their rights and to ensure justice. Their efforts have and continue to contribute to more equal and thriving societies for all. However, human rights, women's rights, and gender equality are increasingly under threat. We are seeing the resurgence of conservative narratives that relegate a woman's role to family and procreation, and a rise in persecution based on gender identity and sexual orientation. Authoritarian, patriarchal, and misogynistic narratives that reward toxic masculinity and legitimize sexism are on the rise. Women human rights defenders are bearing the brunt of these developments. We need to provide them with support and show a united front to stop this backlash. First, by using positive and inclusive narratives to demonstrate that gender equality means a better world for everyone. It has been shown time and again that when girls and women have equal access to education and employment opportunities, all of society benefits. Businesses with more than 30% women in top leadership roles outperform businesses with only men in leadership. When women and girls have autonomy and agency and can make decisions about their own bodies, free from violence and coercion, they are empowered to reach their full potential. Second, we must stand together against anti-rights and anti-gender narratives. We must address gender equality holistically, recognizing the interdependence and indivisibility of women's human rights. Third, we need to see and treat people as individuals. This means taking into account the richness of every person's experience and walking the talk on intersectionality in our work and in our interactions with partners. Finally, it is essential to enable women human rights defenders in all their diversity to participate in decision-making by providing them with adequate support, politically, publicly, and financially. This is a task for governments, but also for all of us in the international community. As co-chair of the Generation Equality Action Coalition on Feminist Movements and Leadership, my office looks forward to accelerating efforts towards gender equality and the full realization of the rights of women and girls. The need for solidarity within and across the movement for gender equality has never been stronger. Let's unite in this effort.
Thank you very much, Mr. Turk, and colleagues from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for facilitating this video message. We now have come to the heart of the commemoration, and that is a panel of women human rights defenders from all over the world who will speak to the issues that women human rights defenders are facing in their specific context. They will reflect on what women human rights defenders are doing that states should support, learn from, and amplify. It is really my honor to introduce 5 human rights defenders who are participating in this session. And I will just introduce them in the order in which they are going to speak. I'll start with Marucia Lopez Cruz, who's a Mexican feminist and a co-director of the Mesoamerican Initiative of Women Human Rights Defenders. And she works to promote women's rights in rural and indigenous communities. We also have with us Nicole Musumbi, who is an associate for Africa Peace Building Programs at the Global Network of Women Peace Builders. Khadija Ahmadi, who has worked in development roles in government and with different international organizations in Afghanistan, and she was a former mayor of Nili in Afghanistan. They're joined by Noor Sisser, who is the Secretary General of the Women's League of Burma, which is a national network of ethnic women rights organizations working towards the advancement of the status of women for a peaceful, just, and federal democratic union in Myanmar for over the last 20 years. And with us to close off the panel is Jyotsna Maske, who is the Strategic Partnership Facilitator with Urgent Action Fund, Asia Pacific. And as we all know, the Urgent Action Fund is a feminist fund that resources resilience and resistance of women and non-binary activists and defenders in Asia and the Pacific. So with that, we want to start off with Marucia. I think her video is on and she can unmute herself. And I want to ask the panelists, we have 6 minutes, and if you can sort of maintain that. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias por la invitación. Voy a compartir con ustedes la difícil situación que vivimos las defensoras en Mesoamérica, pero también las formas que tenemos de cuidarnos y de mantener la esperanza. La semana pasada, después de un año de estar desaparecida, encontraron en México el cuerpo sin vida de la abogada y defensora de los derechos de las mujeres, Grisel Pérez. También la semana pasada, la defensora del territorio y lideresa del pueblo garífuna de Honduras, Melissa Martínez, fue sometida a un juicio racista e ilegítimo por haber luchado por la restitución de sus tierras junto con su comunidad. El 21 de noviembre, la revolucionaria Dora María Telles celebró su cumpleaños 67 en una cárcel en la que lleva más de un año presa por oponerse al régimen nicaragüense. Esta es la realidad de muchas mujeres que defienden los derechos humanos en México y Centroamérica. Tan solo en lo que va del 2022, en la Iniciativa Mesoamericana de Defensoras, registramos 15 asesinatos y 2.625 agresiones contra defensoras de derechos humanos. En la mayoría de los casos, a las mujeres defensoras de derechos humanos se nos agrede usando la violencia patriarcal. Se nos acusa de malas madres, se nos agrede sexualmente, se amenaza a nuestras hijas e hijos, se nos difama y amenaza con insultos machistas, solo por poner algunos ejemplos. En la base de toda esta violencia están gobiernos y grupos de poder que se articulan para intentar silenciarnos. Tanto en países del sur como del norte, las autoridades se coluden con empresas, con grupos del crimen organizado, con grupos fundamentalistas para reprimir los movimientos sociales e imponer un sistema capitalista, racista y patriarcal. Las mujeres defensoras de derechos humanos nos oponemos a este sistema de muerte y creamos alternativas de vida digna, y por eso somos peligrosas y por eso se nos agrede. Ante esta realidad, desde el 2010, la Iniciativa Mesoamericana de Defensoras trabajamos para responder juntas a la violencia que nos afecta. Actualmente somos más de 2.000 defensoras de 300 organizaciones articuladas en redes en México, Honduras, El Salvador y Nicaragua. Somos defensoras del territorio, feministas, defensoras de la diversidad sexual y de género, sindicalistas, comunidades indígenas, entre muchas otras. Sabemos que la obligación de protegernos es de los estados, pero creamos nuestras propias formas de seguridad y cuidado ante los alarmantes índices de impunidad y el involucramiento de las autoridades en las agresiones en nuestra contra. En cada país contamos con un equipo de defensoras formadas en protección integral feminista que acompañan de manera cercana a organizaciones y mujeres que están en riesgo. Nos cuidamos entre defensoras, en comunidad, fortaleciendo nuestro propio poder para sobrevivir y superar la violencia. Hacemos análisis de riesgo y apoyamos a las defensoras para que puedan llevar a la práctica sus planes de seguridad y también para atender sus necesidades de salud. Contamos con 2 casas de descanso y sanación y 2 casas de refugio para cuando las defensoras y sus familias necesitan protegerse o necesitan un lugar para renovar energías. Ante la falta de datos oficiales, desarrollamos un sistema de registro de agresiones que cuenta con indicadores de género para documentar las violencias que vivimos las defensoras. Alertamos a la comunidad internacional y hacemos llamados de solidaridad para dar visibilidad y apoyo a las defensoras y a las organizaciones que están siendo amenazadas y para reconocer sus aportes a los derechos humanos. Trabajamos por un activismo sostenible en el que no tengamos que dar la vida por la causa, en el que celebremos la alegría, la rebeldía y la importancia de cuidarnos como elementos fundamentales para mantener viva la esperanza por los derechos humanos. Todas estas estrategias integran nuestro enfoque de protección integral feminista, una manera de entender la protección que pone el cuidado en el centro de nuestra acción política para que nuestras luchas puedan seguir floreciendo. En el 2021, la Iniciativa Mesoamericana de Defensoras convocó a organizaciones feministas de distintas partes del mundo para crear el conjunto de medidas imprescindibles para la protección de defensoras en el marco del Foro Generación Igualdad. En él, afirmamos que ningún compromiso para avanzar en la igualdad es posible si las defensoras somos agredidas y exigimos que los estados, los donantes y los mecanismos internacionales de derechos humanos trabajen de manera urgente para detener de una vez todos los asesinatos contra defensoras, para detener las campañas de odio y estigmatización, para liberar a todas las presas defensoras de derechos humanos y detener la criminalización, para proteger a las defensoras que migran, que solicitan asilo o que son víctimas de desplazamiento forzado, para poner límites claros y sancionar a todas las empresas que difaman, agreden y asesinan a las defensoras y destruyen sus comunidades, para aportar recursos flexibles y suficientes para que las defensoras nos podamos proteger en nuestros propios términos. Por cada una de estas exigencias, definimos medidas concretas que lo único que requieren es la voluntad política y el esfuerzo coordinado. Solo así podremos avanzar hacia el mundo de derechos y justicia que las defensoras, a pesar de toda esta violencia, estamos construyendo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Murcia, and I really very much appreciate that you started off your presentation with an elaboration of those who are experiencing harm as we have this discussion. So it's not theoretical, it's really very urgent that we come together and commit to the promotion and protection of women human rights defenders. I would like to ask Nicole to make a presentation now.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor. Before I share what is happening in DRC, I just wanted to give a short background on where I started. So I started my involvement in this field through the Young Women Leaders for Peace program, which was initiated by GNWP by the Global Network of Women Peace Builders in the eastern part of DRC since 2014. And now it has expanded in 12 countries, including Colombia and also Myanmar. And as Roberta said, I'm now an associate for Africa Peace Building Program in GNWP. So during this journey, I have been observing that beside the challenges faced by all human rights defenders in DRC due to the DRC's context being characterized by violence, let's just talk about the recent attack of the M23 rebel group in the eastern parts of DRC, in the neighboring areas of the Goma city where I'm living right now. Having this context in mind, women human rights defenders face specific social, cultural, economic, and political structural challenges that not only hinder their work in programmatic human rights, but also harm them in their daily lives. So some of the threats that I've been observing, we have the stigmatization of women rights defenders, which are connected to the action that are considered sensitive in DRC, such as the support for victims of sexual violence, but also the support to victims of sexual and reproductive rights, the right to access land for women, and also the use of sexual and gender stereotypes for the purpose of discrimination. For example, women defenders suffer from humiliation and stigmatization in local community due to social and cultural belief and tradition. Let's also not forget the online threat that women are facing. It's true that not a large number of women are using the online space, but those who are using the online space also face hateful comments or posts targeting them, which are coming from the community intending to make them feel guilty by painting them to be prostitute or corrupt. But they also face structural barriers that affect the capacity of women to engage in human rights, such as the lack of access to financial resources. The UN Women Deputy Executive Director also mentioned this, the lack to the access to the funding, which is also a challenge faced by women human rights defenders, but also the non-implementation of national and international laws guaranteeing women rights. And beside all this trade, one of the most important things that have been done is the creation of a network in North and South Kivu, which aim to prevent the violation of the rights, but also to ensure the protection of women defenders and to reduce the risk of the negative impact of which comes from working in an isolated manner and to advocate for the enhancement and improvement of women rights defender working conditions. In addition to providing capacity building for women human rights defenders, these networks are space where women gather to discuss how to best design a knowledge mechanism, but also to monitor, plan for protection cases, to address the social, economic, and cultural structures that are the root of the threat faced by the women defender in North and South Kivu. But also they took this space to mobilize and to involve male human rights defenders as allies in the protection of women human rights defenders, and to engage them in changing the social norms and gender stereotype that perpetuate the discrimination and inequality. So to make this gender sensitive and more effective, women inclusion in decision-making spaces is key, so that women's ideas and leadership can be exported from these networks into policy spaces. And there is a need for women to work together, to raise their voices and join their effort to improve their protection and security. So I call on all national, regional, and international partners to improve funding practices by including long-term support going beyond workshop format, and also include a flexible funding for diverse needs, which mainly means including dedicated funding to protection, caretaking, psychological support. Remember the context that I have been explaining you where the women rights defenders work, which are changing but also are violent. So there is a need to include the flexible funding for those diverse needs, but also to reduce administrative and legal barrier to finding local peace builders. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole. I would now ask Khadija Ahmadi to make her presentation. Yes.
Okay, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's great honor and privilege to present the Afghan women's situation and women human rights defender in this outstanding event today. I'm not only speaking of the woman rights defender or of the female politician. I want to be rather the voice of Afghanistan women in this meeting. We all know what happened in Afghanistan last year. We are well aware who are currently paying the real cost of these political and military failures and this tragedy. Now the Afghanistan have once again became a safe haven for terrorist groups and unfortunately complete heel to the citizens of Afghanistan. Political disintegration, economic failure, ambiguous future, and millions abandoned hunger and poor people are the outcome of this failure. They are day by day further getting marginalized. Women have been removed from the job system and from the defense authority roles. They have not been only lost their jobs and their citizen rights. They lost their freedom and lost their dreams. 2 million girls who are deprived of education have not been allowed to go to the school more than 1 year. 5,000 women police are living under anxiety and fear of losing their lives. Underage girls are forced to marriage. Parents are selling their kids to survive. Ethnic and religious groups are at the greater risk of genocide. More than 700 Hazara people were killed by Taliban during a year. We lost 56 Hazara female students in the terrorist attack at the Kach Educational Center 2 months ago. As a woman who came from the ongoing reality of Afghanistan, I can proudly express that Afghanistan women are not only the heroes of the current situation who are fighting for their rights, but also They were the real heroes over the 20 years fought for their fundamental rights, democracy and political participation. We start fighting for our right from our families and continue to the street and public. We fought for women and girls' education and to make sure that no girls are deprived of their education rights. We fought to change the politician and government authority mindset and assure them that without meaningful participation of women in the government and politics and society and as well in economy, no progress and development would be happen. The Afghan women have reached to this conclusion that they have no way other than fighting and standing for their rights. Over a year that the Taliban ruling the country, the Afghanistan women frequently march on the street and protest against the anti-feminist law of Taliban. In response to this woman advocacy, the Taliban harassed the female journalists, civil activists, female students, and political women, and severely beaten them. Women activists and defenders were imprisoned and tortured, raped, and assaulted, and many of them are persecuted by Taliban and have been banned from leaving the country. Those women rights defenders who made to third country like Pakistan, living in complete frustration even they are persecuted by the Taliban even in Pakistan. Women human rights defenders are not under serious harassment of Taliban, even their family are threatened and tortured. They need serious and urgent support. Not only over the course of a year, but Afghan women human rights defenders have been always at the front line of the civic and non-violences by fighting and paid huge cost and sacrifice for their struggle. They face rejection of their family and society, different types of treating, assaulting, and they suffer social, psychological, physical harms and consequences, even deaths. Right at the moment that I'm speaking here, 4 of the women human rights defenders are in the Taliban jail. I sincerely ask to you make your best possible effort for unconditional release of them from the Taliban jail, because their battle is our battle. One of them is the Zarifa Yaqubi, more than 1 month in she is in the Taliban jail. One of them is to Farhat Popalzai. There is a lot of women and men in the Taliban jail now. Distinguished guests, the global policy should be set forth in alignment with protection, promoting, and respecting of women's rights, not as an instrumental approach for blackmail or preserving and strengthening of any dictatorship, as what is happening in Afghanistan. The gender equality should be ensured in the framework of good governance and democratic process, which currently seem impossible in Afghanistan under Taliban regime. Making the governments accountable against for their anti-feministic policies and practice, ensuring the safety and security of women's rights defenders, considering comprehensive approach on women's rights on all aspects and the layer of government policies and programs. Comprehensive support of international and human rights organizations from women's rights defenders beyond the verbal promises. Women's rights defenders need practical support. But more disappointing about Afghanistan is we cannot expect from the Taliban as a terrorist group to put in the place a good governance, gender equality oriented policy. Taliban never changed. They are an ideological intelligence-based proxy group, and their ideology is laid on anti-feministic thoughts and view. The systematic elimination of women, whom from half the entire population of the country, for all of the all aspects of the social, economy, politics, government, clearly indicated that no improvement would be happen in this situation. Before calculating my talking points, have not only as a woman participant from Afghanistan, but as a human rights defender who has experienced and received lots of physical and mental arms for promoting and ensuring women's rights for herself and her woman, her country. I would like to call upon all the world leaders, all feminists, and all men and women in the world that your silence is encouraging Taliban extremists to normalize harmful practices against women and normalize women victimization practices. Once more, I want to reiterate that with the Afghanistan women rights defender will not leave history, and we stand till the last person for restoring our fundamental rights and fight for justice, equality, and freedom. Until fulfilling of this purpose, we will not stop. Even if the world community close their eyes on our pain and in our pain, I believe that the struggle of every woman in the world is the struggle of all of us and her, all of us, and her laws is all laws. So far, a world with equality, justice, and freedom. Let us all to be defender of human rights.
Thank you very much. Khadija, okay, can you wrap up?
Yeah. Let's be voice for humanity and human rights. And start with Afghanistan women. We will continue our struggle until the realization of education, work, freedom in our country. Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry to have interrupted you because I think there's so much to be said and a lot of time. But I think what you're telling us is not enough to say that the women of Afghanistan are brave, but rather that they need serious and urgent support to combat the range of very egregious violations of rights in all aspects of their lives. And we will come back to some of that in the plenary. Thank you very much. I would like to ask Norsa Sir to make a presentation.
Firstly, thank you so much for the float and the opportunity to speak to the commemoration of the International Women Human Rights Defender Day. So I'm really honored to be here and speak out about the Burma, Myanmar. So as you may already aware, Burma has more than 17 years civil war. And that most of the women as cheerers, they were victor and survivor. And that also we had so many time of military coup and also many different uprisings. So that's the content of the Burma, the conflict has going on every day till to date. So give you a brief of the military coup in 2021 February, so led to substantial black leadings on and ongoing violations and conflict in Burma, Myanmar. So as of the September 2022, we have collected over 1.5 million people have been eternal displaced. At least 50,000 were killed, include women, children, and elderly. And also at least 254 women active were killed, and more than 40% of the military were led in women. And that 83 political prisoners, include 9 women human rights defenders, were sentenced to death. Then, moreover, sexual violence and also include rape committed by the military junta force have been increasingly reported in several areas and in several townships. So this is the briefly of the information of since the coup. So the resistance of the women's human rights defenders, especially since the military coup, we are not only resist to end the military coup, but also we resist to end any patriarchy and any discrimination, and restore and promote and fight for the gender equality to all of the forms, and bring the women's participation in the decision-making level. So we had more than 50% of the population are women in Burma, and this time, so over 17% of the women they involved in the protests and this resistance movement. So this time, women took risks of their life and fight for democracy and fight for the Federal Democratic Union in Burma. And that we had so many women has been in many different challenges, include the pregnant women and young baby moms, and so many vulnerable women. They are in the challenge in this resistance movement, and that they still keep their commitment and effort to resist and keep their resilience. So, and that we had also women that play in the front line and risk their life very bravely as well. We also see that it is a critical time to record democracy in Burma, Myanmar, and for the Burma, Myanmar women human rights defender and a women human rights organization to express their significant roles in national peace and security. So what we have faced challenges, especially for the women human rights defender. Sexual violence include rape used as a weapon of war, and also increased women insecure, including serious mental health problems, be exposed to the traumatic situation of the extreme violation and conflict. And the lack of the sufficient and timely funding to the excuse activity to the ground, lack of safety space and ensuring environment for the network and peer learning, as well as for the self-reflection. Lack of the engineered leadership training and capacity building, especially mentorship on the communication and advocacy. And also lack of the emergency of supporting the women human rights defender when they face urgent need. What we also call and urge the any of groups and international groups to have a sufficient and a timely provision of the co-flexible funding for the women human rights defender, and also technical accompaniment include mental health and the support of a woman human rights defender, and also help for the support for the safe space and protection, and that also leadership training and promoting their women human rights defender in around the world. And that also we had a common recommendation to condemn the military junta and reject the military as a government and as a authorized. So they are the most illegitimate groups and also terrorist groups. So we all reject it, and also we urge also international community to reject the military, and also try the way and fight the way for the release of the arbitrary detaining peoples, and also help it targeted section and comprehensive embargoed, and also refer the international refer the military junta to the International Criminal Court. So this is what I would like to share today. Thank you so much for the floor as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nosa sir. Again, very difficult context, facing a military junta determined to squash all resistance, but women human rights defenders are standing at great cost. And also, I'm glad that you pointed out very specific recommendations of what we can do practically to support women human rights defenders in your country. And finally, on the panel, I would like to invite Ms. Jyotsna Maske of Urgent Action Fund, who will conclude the panel of women human rights defenders.
Thank you, Roberta. Hello, everyone. It is an honor indeed to share this space with women and non-binary defenders as we commemorate and celebrate the struggles and triumph of women human rights defenders all over the world. I am Jyotsna, and I'm based in Nepal. Urgent Action Fund Asia Pacific is a feminist fund that offers strategic and emergency support and resources for supporting resistance from and building resilience of communities, activists, and movements of women, intersex, trans, and non-binary defenders of the Asia and the Pacific. According to Civicus 2021 Asia and Pacific Monitor, the top 5 violations of civic freedom in Asia and Pacific are restrictive law, human rights defenders detained, protesters detained, journalists detained, and protest disruption. Urgent Action Fund Asia Pacific grant data also reveals that all women human rights defenders are subjected to risks, but defenders who have been historically marginalized experience high rates of human rights violations, including access to basic human rights, health rights, right to housing, right to legal remedies. Examples can be activists working in situations of conflict, indigenous activists, environmental activists, sex workers activists, and activists working in the Pacific. To respond to the situation of crisis and shrinking civil spaces, Urgent Action Fund is guided by our feminist values to focus on forefronting lived experiences of activists and defenders, relationship building and nurturing trust and solidarity and care, and the need to be agile and flexible to understand the context of activists and defenders and the support they require. As we proceed in supporting activists and defenders, Urgent Action Fund supports resilience of activists and movements to bounce back, to re-strategize, to reconfigure, and to remobilize. It can be in forms of activists who have faced surveillance by the government, and it's time for them to take a step back to re-strategize the actions on how they will proceed in responding to the situation of the government. Or it can be activists coming together for community farming, for food security in situations of economic crisis. The second one is immediate and time-urgent security grants for activists who needs immediate relocation, activists who needs physical security, digital security, where they have been in constant surveillance by the government or the police, or even safer modes of transportation where they seek the need for legal remedies. The third one would be centering care and well-being, which is a core part of the work that Urgent Action Fund does to support activists to be resilient for their resilience. We understand that activists face gendered nature of threats and burnout, and it's very important for them to support for revival, for their medical support, among others. The fourth one would be intentional focus on specific priorities of marginalized activists and movements, such as specific defenders who do not have access to fund, defenders who do not have access to funds because they are not registered, but they don't have the legal papers, and in the mainstream focus of defenders, they are not recognized. In doing so, we collaborate with country-based activists to guide us and to recommend us so that the funds can be outreached and defenders who need are able to access. The other idea is linking activists to various networks and movements, holding unconventional gathering spaces for solidarity and plotting ideas on how to be safe and create an enabling environment for defenders to continue their activism. The last one is to be flexible and agile fund, responding to specific needs of defenders, which might not be a part of our mandate, but we are agile and flexible to respond to it. And also language justice in terms of translation of documents so that more activists can have access to the funds. These are some of the strategic ways that have been designed to respond to needs of activists and defenders. And it is very crucial to recognize the threats and risks faced by intersection of identities of defenders and to put their experiences and voices in the center of what we do. Thank you very much. Over to you, Roberta.
Thank you very much, Jyotsna. I very much value when you talk about what are the feminist values of the Urgent Action Fund, the forefronting of the experiences of women rights defenders, this importance of nurturing trust, solidarity, care. And I think all of that is so important for reliability, which I think is critical in feminist organizing. And you spoke about understanding the context of women rights defenders in crafting a response of solidarity. Thank you very much to everyone on the panel. We'll have a chance at a short plenary to have an interaction amongst you. But now I would like to move on the agenda for the time being to invite representatives of 2 member states who are here with us today. Member states have very specific obligations, both to protect women rights defenders and to create and maintain the enabling and safe environment that facilitates the work of human rights defenders, which are so critical for rule of law, for democracy, and for the largest enjoyment of human rights. So we have 2 representatives of 2 member states who will reflect with us on the approaches that have been taken to promote and protect women rights defenders in their country and by their country. And they will also share their views on what actions are needed in the multilateral system. With us, I would like to start with Ambassador Mona Juul, who is the permanent representative of Norway to the United Nations. Ambassador Juul has been with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs quite a while and was a member of a small Norwegian team that facilitated the secret negotiations between Israel and the PLO, leading to the Oslo Agreement. And she will be followed by Ambassador Sonia Pereira, who has a distinguished and long career within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in her country in Colombia, and she's currently the Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations. Ambassador Juul, can you please take the floor?
Thank you so much, Roberta. And let me also start by thanking the host and not least the human rights defenders that we just heard giving such very, very strong testimonies. I'm really honored to join you today to mark the International Women Human Rights Defenders Day. Aware of the many challenges you face, yet you preserve. And I think that is a cause for celebrating. And I can assure you, Norway will continue to support you. We know how important work you are doing, and we know how dire the situation is for you. This is why today's event is important for the international community to hear your first-hand accounts and, not least, recommendations, which should be kept front and center. I have been invited to speak, as Roberta just said, about the role of states in promoting and protecting women human rights defenders. For Norway's part, we have given priority supporting human rights defenders through the UN. We lead the negotiations on the resolution on human rights defenders in both the Human Rights Council and in the General Assembly. The General Assembly resolution adopted by consensus in November of last year reaffirms that states have a responsibility to protect human rights defenders, while also calling on states to develop and implement appropriate and effective mechanisms to protect women human rights defenders, including in digital spaces. Still, we know that when women peace builders and human rights defenders speak, they risk more than men. women are specifically targeted for their participation in peace and security processes, to silence, to humiliate, and to discredit them. There are obviously protection gaps and a need for adequate responses to threats and reprisals, demand for accountability, and clear political signals of support to the work of women human rights defenders and peace builders. There are also responsibilities of states. However, it is not just states that play an important role, but all parts of the international community, including the United Nations itself. Norway strongly believes a much more coordinated and systematic approach is needed to prevent and respond to targeted attacks against women human rights defenders, especially those who engage in peace and security processes. We greatly appreciate the many recommendations put forward in the Security Council open debate during the Norwegian presidency in January, setting out how the UN, the Security Council, and member states can strengthen our prevention and response measures, protect and empower women human rights defenders, and promote the right to participate. This includes the recommendation by more than 40 civil society experts and human rights defenders on the protection measure they want, which resulted in a summary report, one really worth reading for any UN member state. Many of those recommendations highlighted risk mitigation and management as an immediate response, but also the need for increased resources, as several of you have pointed to as well, to support the work and protection of women human rights defenders, and ensuring that relevant UN entities are set up to do the same. Financial support to rapid response mechanisms, such as the Women, Peace and Humanitarian funding window for women human rights defenders, funding window for human rights defenders at risk, will also remain invaluable. This leads to my final point. It is vital that we turn our collective commitment into action. Norway, together with 13 other current, previous, and incoming Security Council members, have been implementing a statement of shared commitments to ensure that civil society can safely participate at the Security Council without fear of reprisals. Through this, we have all committed to a zero-tolerance approach to reprisal against civil society briefers, as well as to undertake risk analysis and risk mitigation together with each briefer. We have also shared our experience and lessons learned between presidencies in order to improve women's full, equal, meaningful participation at council meetings. Let me conclude by underlining Norway's steadfast commitment to working together with all partners to strengthen our prevention measures and to protect women human rights defenders and peace builders. Reprisal must never be allowed to become a tool to silence voices advocating for human rights and sustainable peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Juul. And also thank you. Norway has been very much on the forefront of the multilateral efforts, as you've pointed out, to promote and protect women human rights defenders and in the worst scenarios. And I especially appreciate the information that you've given us about the accord between Norway and past and present members of the Security Council. to ensure that there are no reprisals for human rights defenders. I would like to pass on the floor to Ambassador Pereira for her presentation.
Muchas gracias, Roberta. Gracias también a ONU Mujeres y a la Oficina del Alto Comisionado de Naciones Unidas para los Derechos Humanos por la invitación para que Colombia hiciera parte de este importante evento. La embajadora Salavata envía un caluroso saludo y se disculpa por no poder acompañarnos hoy, ya que se encuentra representando a Colombia en el Comité Intergubernamental para la Salvaguardia del Patrimonio Cultural Inmaterial de la UNESCO en Rabat. Antes de referirme al enfoque que se ha adoptado en mi país para la protección de las defensoras de derechos humanos, queremos expresar nuestra solidaridad, admiración y respeto a todas esas mujeres valientes que dedican su vida a la defensa de los derechos humanos. Por otra parte, quiero hacer énfasis en un hecho significativo de la gran importancia que el gobierno del presidente Petro otorga a este asunto. Esto es el hecho de que muchas de las oficiales de alto rango de la administración actual fueron y de alguna manera siguen siendo defensoras de derechos humanos. Tal es el caso de la viceministra de Asuntos Multilaterales del Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores, Laura Gil, de nuestra representante permanente ante Naciones Unidas, Leonor Salavata, y de la propia vicepresidente de la República, Francia Márquez. Esto, a su vez, hace parte de la materialización de uno de los pilares de nuestro Plan Nacional de Desarrollo, que dice, abro comillas, para poder profundizar nuestra democracia debemos garantizar la representación real de las mujeres en todas las instancias de tomas de decisiones. Una sociedad participativa requiere que las mujeres defensoras de los derechos humanos, ambientales y del territorio puedan ejercer su liderazgo sin miedo a poner en riesgo su vida, la de su familia y de su comunidad. Por eso, uno de los primeros pasos que se han adelantado en mi país es el diseño participativo abierto del Plan Nacional de Acción de la Resolución 1325 del Consejo de Seguridad, que ya se encuentra en marcha. El objetivo ambicioso de tener un documento concertado solo puede lograrse escuchando las voces de quienes trabajan día a día para asegurar la realización de los derechos humanos, muchas veces poniendo en riesgo su propia seguridad. En un contexto como el colombiano, la protección de las defensoras de derechos humanos no solo es importante, sino indispensable. En este sentido, otra de las líneas claras que se ha establecido en la hoja de ruta para los próximos 4 años es fortalecer la prevención y protección para poblaciones vulnerables desde un enfoque diferencial, colectivo e individual, haciendo especial énfasis en las poblaciones más vulnerables, como los líderes y lideresas sociales, defensores y defensoras de derechos humanos, personas en proceso de reincorporación, entre otros. Para lograrlo, y como parte de la nueva política para afrontar el multicrimen, se ha previsto, entre otros, la formulación de planes interinstitucionales focalizados a escala territorial y el fortalecimiento de la capacidad de respuesta del cuerpo élite de la policía y de la unidad policial para la edificación de la paz. Además, se buscará asegurar la implementación y los recursos para el Programa Integral de Garantías para Mujeres Lideresas y Defensoras de Derechos Humanos, así como la reactivación de la Comisión Nacional de Garantías creadas en el Acuerdo de Paz del 2016. Todos estos esfuerzos nacionales están encaminados a garantizar el pleno ejercicio de los derechos y libertades de la población vulnerable y se sustentan en el diálogo permanente entre autoridades, las comunidades y otros liderazgos. En el plano internacional, Colombia se ha comprometido a adoptar una política exterior feminista. Esta visión implica, entre otros, que las mujeres se pongan en el centro de la conversación, y es por eso que estamos convencidos de que en el plano multilateral debemos seguir defendiendo firmemente la transversalización del enfoque de género. Para nosotros, por su misma definición, el enfoque de género es un enfoque de inclusividad y de igualdad, en el que no solo nosotros los gobiernos somos quienes tenemos algo que decir. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Pereira. So much of what you said, there's continuity with other presentations this morning, but I also want to join what you said, what Justice said, starting with the experience of human rights defenders, and many of you who are in public service in Colombia do come with the human rights background, and you're able then to bring that experience to shaping a national policy. I want to thank both you and Ambassador Juul for your presentation. I know that you may have to go, so we understand that you may have other responsibilities. Now, we're running a bit late, but I would certainly like to give us maybe 10 minutes, if we can, to have an interaction amongst the panelists, anyone who wishes to respond to anything that they've heard. And also maybe some of our attendees may have posed questions. Alison, I don't know if you've been following that, but if you can.
Yes, we do have one question in the chat. We have a question coming in. How do international communities nowadays respond to diverse issues and perspectives of women's rights from several regions? And it's not posed to anyone in particular, so I open the floor to any one of our speakers who wish to respond. Awesome.
Thank you so much, Alison. Did I understand the question correctly? How does the international community try to support women human rights defenders? Was that the question?
That is the gist of it in different regions, yes.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And I think, first of all, I hope that we've now heard that there is a lot going on. I really think that during this last year, this issue has really become or is now top of mind, really, of a lot of member states, as well as the United Nations leadership and agencies. So from the UN's side, I really think it's true to say that we have a number of both initiatives, guidelines and strategies, both for headquarters and for our colleague in the countries, on how to support women's rights defenders, and also to include them in responses, for example, in crisis response and in other ways, in questions that concern them and the women they represent. And I actually do see that this has gotten much more attention in recent years. I actually do think that the Me Too movement shed light on women who fight for other women's rights. And since then, I think the attention has become much greater. There are countries like Norway that have worked for a much longer time with this. But I see now that there are countries coming together in the circle of feminist foreign policies, for example, that has women's rights defenders best and support for them very high on their agendas. At the same time, I also described that we have the fund, for example, where the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund that can channel funds pretty quickly and without a lot of administration to those who need it the most in crisis settings and so on. We have tools today that we didn't have before, supported by member states mostly. So I think we have a good understanding nowadays and some good tools, but I also see that it's enormously important to keep up the funding, the support, and these kinds of discussions, because we also know that we operate in a political environment of well-organized resistance to gender equality. And that resistance, it has different phases, but many times is also well-organized and often better funded and has also access to power in many ways. So we have to understand that and just continue. And I think that, as I said, political support and funding, and as many pointed out, to build infrastructure for implementation of law and reform, not only the decisions, but actually make sure we help implementation. That is important, and it's also one of the main tasks for UN Women in the countries where we work. Sorry perhaps for a long reply, Alison.
Thank you, Osa. I don't know if there's anyone else who wants to respond to that, but I also see we have another question. Alison, can you assist?
Yes, no, thank you so much, Osa. This question is sort of similar, but more specific to grassroots women human rights defenders and their organizations. The question is, how can the UN and the international community, so including the states and others, really support grassroots and community organizations in their work? And I know we've heard from speakers talk about funding, but I don't know if anybody, maybe Norway or Colombia, wants to respond to the support for grassroots organizations.
And Alison, I would also say maybe the women human rights defenders on the panel, they may have some very specific recommendations about how grassroots defenders can be more practically supported.
Absolutely.
So the floor is open to anyone who wants to speak.
Can I answer from my Burma Myanmar context? As a women's organization, as ethnic based, basically Women's League of Burma basically operated in the ethnic and a very conflict area. So as a woman human rights defender, we have received some funding, but as I mentioned, it was very limited and lack, especially when we need immediacy funded for the women's human rights defender, because the conflict and the situation getting worse and worse, and the target of the women's human rights defender has getting more and more. So we call for the flexible and also practical funded, because we had a very lack of access those money. We have many different challenges back in sister and many different ways, but we are not mostly go through to cross border to people, to the peoples, basically the groups who in the cross border through them and to the grassroots women. And that the other part, we had some UN agency and NGO that support of the funding as well, but we are for most of the women human rights defender groups, women's human rights groups, so they stand of the non-engagement, especially the engagement with the military junta, even any of groups or any of the donor groups or international agency groups. So if they have an registration under the military junta, we are not confident to accept those of the support, the funding or support from them. So this is what really women's human rights defenders are be careful of those things, those groups that register under the military junta. So this is just briefly that sharing.
Thank you very much. I can't see if there are any other hands up.
Yes, we have representative from Norway, but we also have Mauritius hands up.
Mauricia, can you please go ahead, and then followed by Ambassador Juul?
Sí, muchas gracias. Bueno, yo creo que la mejor manera de apoyar a las defensoras que están trabajando en las comunidades a nivel de base es reconocer que las defensoras en nuestras comunidades tenemos ya nuestras propias formas de protección y apoyar los esfuerzos que estamos haciendo para construir nuestras formas de autoprotección, de cuidado, porque muchas veces los estados son los principales agresores, los gobiernos son los principales agresores. Entonces necesitamos no solo que se hable de defensoras, no solo que se hable de protección, sino que se apoyen los esfuerzos de las propias defensoras. En segundo lugar, quería decir que los fondos son importantes, pero como decía mi compañera anterior, es importante ubicar de dónde vienen los fondos y que esos recursos lleguen de manera segura y que tomen en cuenta que en muchos gobiernos están poniendo nuevas restricciones legales para que la recepción de fondos sea también un objeto de criminalización. Entonces, en las convocatorias y en los requisitos que las convocatorias de fondos tienen que tomar en cuenta esa realidad. Y por último, creo que nosotras llevamos pues más de 12 años en distintos foros internacionales poniendo en el centro la alerta sobre lo que está pasando contra las defensoras y lo que vemos efectivamente es que la situación cada vez es peor. Tiene que haber una acción internacional mucho más contundente y actualmente consideramos que tiene que haber un énfasis y una mayor presión en los sistemas de justicia, porque es ahí donde se está dando muchas de las agresiones contra las defensoras de derechos humanos. Pero nos preocupa que todos estos foros que son tan importantes sigan ocurriendo y que las respuestas desde la mayoría de los estados siguen siendo muy tibias o sigue aumentando la violencia.
Thank you. Over to Norway.
Ambassador, can you please go ahead?
Thank you very much. Not the ambassador, she had to leave, unfortunately, for the council, but I am the WPS focal point at the Norwegian mission. Just wanted to quickly add to all of the great things that have come up here that from the, at least the state's side, one of the things that we will have to do to also support the grassroots is to actually listen basically to what is needed. And in some cases, it might be supporting out in the open. In some cases, it might be supporting in the background. There are very different and unique needs in all the different situations, and also depending on what is going on with the situation, how it's developing. One of the things that we are asked the most often is to put pressure on actors, and it could be anything from the national actors to non-state actors, or it could be the UN system, depending on who needs to step up. In some cases, it's opening the doors just to make sure that there are dialogues between the decision makers and the grassroots, so that they can actually discuss how the decisions that are being made have effect on the ground. And creating basically a feedback loop between what's decided not just here in New York, but it could also be other places. I'd also like to mention the national action plans that most countries work very closely on. There are many opportunities for supporting not just inputs from grassroots there, but also supporting national actors in undertaking consultations broadly and making sure that they get all perspectives that they need. And this is the national ownership on how to protect human rights defenders that will be integrated into that work. So I am sure there's already many places where this is being done, but to mention a few. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I do want to ask your indulgence. We're running maybe 10 minutes late, but I would like to now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a short video message from the Special Rapporteur for Human Rights Defenders.
Dear friends, I am delighted to send this video and to join you in paying tribute to women human rights defenders today. Since taking up the mandate in May 2020, I have spoken directly to hundreds and hundreds of women human rights defenders and have heard about the huge range of issues that they work on, from rescuing refugees and migrants from drowning in the Mediterranean, to peace building in Cameroon, to seeking accountability for the disappeared in Argentina, to demanding gender equality in Saudi Arabia, to fighting environmental degradation by corporate actors in Thailand and so many other places. I have heard how women human rights defenders often must juggle their work with their caring responsibilities, or do it covertly, or be the ones who must sacrifice it when a crisis hits, as we saw so often during the pandemic. Yet no matter the world region in which they are based, women human rights defenders tell me of the similar risks that they face, which we are all so very familiar with now. The online smearing, the sexualized threats, the gendered insults, as well as the arrests, the imprisonment, the physical and sexual violence, and the killings. Others do extraordinary work in conflict zones where the risk of targeted attack is coupled with the risk of untargeted attack. I know of one woman in Ukraine who changed her work to delivering food, medical, and water to people trapped, the old, the disabled, and the terminally ill. And she did this from 8 a.m. in the morning until 8 at night. Despite all this, women human rights defenders continue to drive forward efforts to achieve civil and just societies, as we have seen with the Green Wave in Latin America, the political transition in Sudan, and as we are seeing today in Iran and Afghanistan. Despite threats and violence, women human rights defenders are achieving remarkable successes. My next report to the Human Rights Council will be on the victories achieved by human rights defenders to coincide with the 25th anniversary of the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. In researching and writing the report, I was struck by how many of the systemic changes around the world that have taken place over the last 25 years have come from women and LGBTI defenders, whether it is greater sexual health and reproductive rights, equal treatment, or abolition of discriminatory laws. While it is true that we are seeing a rollback of women's rights in some parts of the world, and of course, no rights at all for women in other parts of the world, and the continued exclusion of women in decision-making processes in other parts, I believe women human rights defenders can play an essential role in arresting the slide of rights. However, they cannot do it alone. They need continued political, financial, moral, and practical support from states, from international organizations, and from individuals. And initiatives such as this, like today's events, can really help. I'd like to leave you with a short poem by Nikita Gill, which often comes to mind these days when I see the continued protests by women in Iran, and it's called Wild Embers. We are the descendants of the wild women you forgot. We are the stories you thought would never be taught. They should have checked the ashes of the women they burned alive, because it takes a single wild ember to bring a whole wildfire to life. Thank you very much. Enjoy the day.
Thank you. That was Mary Lawlor, the Special Rapporteur on the situation of women human rights defenders. She herself was a human rights defender, is a human rights defender. In 2001, indeed, she founded the Frontline Defenders, the International Foundation for the Protection of Women Human Rights Defenders. So we've kind of come to the end of our program. We've heard very clearly that women human rights defenders protect rights, they protect democracy, importantly, they protect our planet. And when they do that, they are actually challenging very entrenched power relations and intersectional power relations, whether they're capitalistic, as we started off with Marusia's reflection, racist, patriarchy, a combination of all of that, actually. It's never one oppressive regime, it's always a combination of oppressive regimes which drive inequalities and exclusion the world over. So in confronting power dynamics and power relations, women human rights defenders are themselves facing real risk, and we've heard a lot about that, the persecution, the reprisals, sexualized violence, the detentions, disappearances, and the final harm, high levels of femicide. So they're asking us, all of us, when we are all human rights defenders, I think they're asking, or we are asking, that we need more than words, we need practical solidarity. Flexible funding, many spoke about that. Agile response, digital security, transportation security, language justice, I heard. There are a whole range of recommendations that were made here today, but really it's about the practical solidarity, but also the political commitment and the political will to promote and protect women human rights defenders, and to make sure that the normative framework that we've been speaking a lot about is being implemented everywhere, and that the multilateral system is paying close attention to that. As we close, I would like to give closing time for closing remarks to two persons. Sabine Fraser-Gomez, who is the chief of the Leadership and Governance section at UN Women, and herself a champion of the Action Coalition for Feminist Movements and Leadership. And one of the Action Coalition leaders, Ms. Rosenda Maldonado Godinez, who works intensively on Indigenous women's rights, combating gender-based violence, working for access to justice and land rights and political participation. And she's part of the Technical Secretariat of the National Political Assembly of Indigenous Women. So over to you, Sabine, followed by Rosenda.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Thank you very, very much, Marusia, Nicole, Hatice, Nuser, and Jyotsna. Your words were so powerful today. Thank you for sharing your experiences, your realities, and also your clear recommendations. It's extremely important for us to hear from you today on International Women's Human Rights Day, but it's also extremely important for us to celebrate you, to really acknowledge all the work, all the sacrifice, all the risk that you are taking every day in the work that you do. It's also extraordinarily important for us to acknowledge you as heroes and to acknowledge the many women that you work with who are also fighting for the same rights and the same liberties that you are. So thank you so much for sharing today with us. And please know that what your words were extremely powerful. Now, it's important for us to show solidarity, not only today, but every day. And as we know, solidarity is a key element, perhaps the key element, in feminist action in leadership. Thank you for your very clear and concrete recommendations on a whole range of issues, on protection, on the importance of having safe spaces, on flexible funding, on the importance for states and UN organizations to be clearer and stronger in their advocacy, on various issues, including the release of prisoners, on the importance for states and the UN to also condemn violators of human rights and to not engage with them in many instances. These are all things that we need to do more of at the UN and amongst the international community. This meeting has given us a clear roadmap and clear recommendations on the way forward. These recommendations will stay with the Action Coalition, with the Generation Equality Forum, with UN Women, and with other allies that are working together on supporting women human rights defenders and human rights in general. Thank you very much, all who has participated today. Thank you to those who have organized and taken part in the session. I'd like to give a special thank you to Roberta and Allison, who have been working on this for a very long time, but also a very big thank you to the Action Coalition leaders and commitment makers who are going to drive this forward together with the UN system and other allies. We're almost at the end of the session today, but I just want to say that the voices of the women human rights defenders, your voices will remain very clear in our minds and will continue to guide our work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sabine. And now over to Rosenda, closing us off.
Muchas gracias, Roberta. Muchas gracias a todas las creadoras de este espacio, a todas las panelistas también por sus excelentes presentaciones y por venir también en este momento y en este día tan importante a colocar su palabra, a contar sus realidades que viven en sus regiones y con la que nos pudimos también dar cuenta en esta mañana y en esta tarde de que las defensoras de derechos humanos en todo el mundo vivimos en un riesgo constante. Como bien se dijo a lo largo de este diálogo, que sirva esta conmemoración de este día de las defensoras de derechos humanos para que todas las personas, autoridades y comunidad internacional sumen esfuerzos necesarios para hacer un alto a la violencia que viven las defensoras de derechos humanos. Pues las fechas conmemorativas considero que no deben solo de estar en una hoja de calendario, sino que deben de servir para hacer un alto en el camino y acelerar los esfuerzos para generar políticas globales que apoyen a las defensoras de derechos humanos en su trabajo diario. Hemos escuchado a lo largo de este diálogo que los altos índices de agresiones e impunidad que viven las defensoras de derechos humanos en toda su diversidad son graves en todo el mundo. Y entonces también es importante reconocer que a pesar de estos enormes retos que enfrentamos en el día a día, las defensoras de derechos humanos en toda la diversidad, hemos implementado también la creación de buenas prácticas, como la cuestión de la implementación y creación de redes de apoyo para caminar en colectivo. También hemos generado estos espacios de autocuidado que ya se comentaba hace rato también por parte de las panelistas, y que estos espacios de autocuidado nos ayudan a hacer frente a las violencias que vivimos en este día a día y que de esta manera podemos realizar nuestra labor desde entornos de equilibrio físico, mental y espiritual, ¿no? También decir que me sumo al llamado de que se garanticen fondos accesibles para que las defensoras podamos realizar nuestras actividades. Y también a que se sigan realizando acciones como esta que se implementó el día de hoy, ¿no? En la cual estamos visibilizando estas problemáticas. Y también la otra cuestión que creo es importante es sumarnos a co-construir juntas estas acciones que consideremos importantes para reducir los riesgos que vivimos las defensoras de derechos humanos en todo el mundo. Por ello, creo que es fundamental e importante y urgente también que la comunidad internacional haga los llamados y acciones necesarias para que los estados parte garanticen a las defensoras de derechos humanos en toda su diversidad la libertad para poder desempeñar su labor en entornos seguros y libres de violencia, observando en todo momento el enfoque interseccional, pues hay sectores también de la población que vivimos estas agresiones de forma diferenciada por las condiciones de pobreza, de marginación, de desigualdad, de exclusión, entre otras condiciones en las que vivimos, como es el caso de las defensoras y mujeres indígenas. Gracias, buen día.
Thank you very much, Rosenda. So we give you the last word, and I thank everyone for their participation. Have a good day.